Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Cinema Heroes. I'm Justin Speck.
I'm John Pelzel.
And today we're talking about Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Released in 1986, directed by Leonard Nimoy. Written by Steve Mearson and Peter Krikes and Harve Bennett and Nicholas Meyer from a story by Leonard Nimoy and Harve Bennett. Starring William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, Walter Koenig, I'm doing this from memory, George Takei, Nichelle Nichols, and Catherine Hicks. She plays Jillian. Mark Leonard plays Sarek. He's in this movie for a little bit as well. And that's all I can really remember. But this was Star Trek IV, which is really kind of interesting because it's considered 2, 3, and 4 are actually kind of considered a trilogy. They all take place right where the previous movie left off. You know, it's all kind of, I won't say it's all one long storyline, but it's all a continued story, I guess you could say. Whereas Wrath of Khan really is not super connected to the motion picture. It's almost like they wanted us to forget about the motion picture and when they started with Wrath of Khan.
Which, as you know, I like the motion picture. I used to
too.
not like Khan.
Right.
And I liked Search for Spock.
Right.
And I had been at the point where I liked the odd number movies and did not like the even number, which is far from the norm.
That's true. I'm curious to hear, how many times have you seen this movie now?
This is the second time I've seen it.
Okay. This is at least the third time I've seen it, maybe more than that. But I had watched it again recently, not too long ago.
The first time I saw it, I thought it was really stupid.
Well, you know what? As I was watching it today, I was like, I really like this movie, but I can understand. I think most Star Trek fans like it too, but I was like, I can understand why John wouldn't like it because.
But yeah, please explain.
Well,
because I'm curious.
Here's my guess anyway. You might have other problems with it, but it's, if you are a Star Trek fan and you really like these characters and everything, this is a comedy, and they took these characters and they kind of made them silly a little bit for this, and I think it really works. I think the whole idea, it's kind of the fish out of water story with them traveling back to 1986 and they're from the future and they don't, I love, they're like, they still use money here, that type of thing. But it is, it's not a typical episode of Star Trek. It's not as serious as they typically are and everything. It was a much lighter, comedic, sillier take on Star Trek. And some of it I think really works. But I can understand, I guess, why you wouldn't like it.
Yeah, I just thought originally, and I'll go ahead and say it now, I still do. The whole story of the whales is just very hokey.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, because the 80s and even the 90s, I think, Save the Whales was like a big thing.
Yeah.
And
totally.
Yeah.
This was definitely a public service announcement.
Right. Yeah. We have to take care of the whales. Right. And I thought of that too, watching it today. I remember, and it's funny because before I saw any of the Star Trek movies, I knew that there was a Star Trek movie about the whales. There was there might have been maybe I watched like a scene of a Star Trek movie or something on TV, and my dad was like, "Is this the one with the whales?" Like, I don't know, but I knew there was a Star Trek one with whales.
That's interesting. I had no idea.
Really? Yeah.
So, the first time I saw this movie was around the time I first started just binging Star Trek on Netflix when they first released it. It was around the time of, I don't even think Into Darkness had been released.
Right.
I think that's why I started watching them and fell in love with the original show, and then made sure I watched all of the original show before I went on to the movie. So I had never even seen a Star Trek movie at that point.
Yeah, and so it's, again, I can kind of understand why you wouldn't like necessarily the comedic take of of the Star Trek
Right.
characters and stuff.
Because I literally watched them back to back. I watched the motion picture and then
Wrath
Con
of
and
Khan, right.
yeah. So this coming after, and I didn't get it.
Mhm.
But I do understand now more since it had been so long, I guess, since I had watched, and coming back and seeing these characters that I knew I used to know better,
Right.
but I still knew their characters. So I think from that perspective, it was really funny because seeing stuff that Kirk and Spock and Scotty, just things that they would say, and I wasn't expecting them, like, I didn't have just a need for them to be traditional.
Right.
I thought made it really funny, and I actually did appreciate the comedy a lot more this time.
Oh, that's cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
I was worried that you were gonna say, you hated it even more or whatever.
No,
that, you
I
disliked
laughed out at least twice out loud.
That's good. So I had a different experience because I got into Star Trek late as well, but not quite as late as you. Although you watched the original series faster than I did. I spread that out over years and years and years, and I finally have watched all 3 seasons of the original series. But
What did you think of the third season?
The third season is definitely not as good. There's maybe a handful of good episodes that season, but overall it's definitely weaker. And I actually read William Shatner wrote a book called Star Trek Memories, and so Gene Roddenberry left after season 2, or he was maybe asked to leave. I can't remember exactly.
I think he was asked to leave.
And they brought in a new producer. And so that producer, I forget the producer's name, but he gets a lot of hate basically for like ruining Star Trek. But Shatner actually kind of stood up for him and is like, it's not really his fault. The CBS or whoever, they also cut their budget too. So they had to do a third season of this sci-fi show on a smaller budget with this producer who had just came in and, maybe didn't quite understand Star Trek as well as Roddenberry obviously did, but had to do the best he could with what he had, But there are some stinkers in that third season for sure.
Yeah, it's quite
the first
different.
2 seasons are very good.
Yeah.
So for me, I actually watched Wrath of Khan was the first Star Trek. Original series cast was the first Star Trek movie I had seen. I'd seen First Contact before that, but and so then I don't remember either my brother just decided to want to watch all the Star Trek movies or they had announced that they were rebooting the movie. I don't think casting had even taken place yet, but like I knew that there was going to be a new Star Trek movie out. We've talked about this when we did the motion picture.
Yeah.
But anyway, my brother and I marathoned the movies. And so we watched motion picture through at least Undiscovered Country, and I might have watched the Next Generation movies as well. I don't know if my brother watched those with me or not. So I watched Voyage Home before I even watched. I take it back. I may have watched one episode of the original series because Space Seed. I wanted to see Space Seed and how it was connected to Wrath of Khan.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I had not really watched the original show at all.
Had the Abrams Star Trek come out yet?
No, I think that's what I was saying. I think they had announced it, but but nothing. I don't even think they had started casting it yet. So
I gotcha. Okay.
This was, I think, around 2007. Maybe, yeah. So maybe they had started casting it. I don't know. But yeah, I think this was around 2007. My brother and I kind of just had a Star Trek marathon. And so I remember watching The Voyage Home for the first time with him, and we both laughed a bunch, and thought it was hilarious and everything. And so I don't think I had the history of the characters and all that stuff that you kind of did by watching the original series first before you watched any of the movies.
I think also too, though, like since I kind of binged the movies too, because I'd been waiting, I was like, I gotta finish the series, and then I get to watch the movies.
The series. Now I can watch the movies. Yeah.
And I think because of that, I wanted the movies to be, taken seriously. I think
sure.
And like I said, the whales definitely affect my I love whales.
Sure.
Okay.
Got nothing against whales.
In fact, I looked up. She mentions. Hold on one second.
Sure.
She mentions that there were only 10,000 whales left in the movie, and I looked it up because I was concerned about them. And there are now 80,000 whales.
Okay.
Humpback whales, in particular. So.
I wonder if that was true in 86. I wonder if there were only 10,000.
Oh, I'm sure.
Repopulated and.
I bet it was, yeah.
All because of this movie.
I would imagine it. No, like for real.
It might have helped a little, yeah.
Yeah, I would say it had an effect to some degree. But yeah, apparently there used to be 100,000. So we're not quite there yet.
Okay. Still got some work to do.
Yeah, save the whales.
The whales thing doesn't bother me as much as let's jump into the story here.
Yes.
The movie basically starts off with, right where 3 ends. And I remember you texted me, you were like, I wish I had rewatched 3. And I haven't watched 3 probably since we did the podcast episode on it. But I do remember that they trick the Klingons. The Klingons beam aboard the Enterprise, but they had already started the self-destruct sequence. And they had beamed themselves onto the Klingon bird of prey. And so the Klingons blew themselves up, and they were able to take the Klingon bird of prey. But they stole the Enterprise in 3 to go take Spock, or actually it was McCoy, and to go to the planet that Spock's body was on, and then take him to, I guess it was Vulcan, to do the ritual to get his body back and all that stuff. So they were all in trouble with Starfleet. And that was kind of what the whole, that's why the Klingons are yelling in the beginning, saying that Kirk is a terrorist because they blew up the Klingons, even though Klingons were the bad guys in the 3rd movie and everything. But really, they're mostly in trouble for Starfleet told them, no, you can't go do this Spock mission, and they went against orders and stole the Enterprise and went on their way. So this movie kind of starts off with it's not really the disciplinary hearing, but it's like almost like a case where the Klingons are trying to say this, they need to execute Kirk, basically, because that's what the Klingons do. So anyway, so Kirk and his crew and their Klingon bird of prey are on the planet Vulcan, and Spock is kind of relearning everything and being kind of reintroduced to his old crewmates and everything. But out there in space, there's this space probe, this alien probe that is passing by other starships and star bases and headed towards Earth. And this is the one question I kind of had about this space probe, is that it seems like I couldn't tell if it was just anything that got near the space probe caused power malfunctions and power down. Like, it was like the space probe was just like a floating EMP type thing. Or if it was it was searching for the signal, and if it didn't see the signal from, like, it was sending out the whale song, and if this starship didn't give whale song back, then it was like, and it just kind of maliciously was causing them to have power outages or whatever you want to call it.
They mention that that's not the case, that it's doing it unintentionally because it didn't know that it was causing harm. So, okay, well then there's an issue at the very end of the movie. Because we see the space probe leaving, and it approaches the starbase, and as it gets closer to the starbase, the lights on the starbase come on. And so I feel like it should have been after the probe went past the starbase that the lights should have come on. Well, wasn't this after that, like, ball had gone back inside?
Yeah, so maybe it was the ball that was causing it.
Yeah, that's how I saw it. They
Got
focused really heavily on that beam and the ball
and
the sound it was making.
Right.
So that was it being active.
Gotcha. The space probe itself was kind of interesting. Like, it was basically just a giant cylinder with this beam and then a globe.
Yes.
And I couldn't, like, part of me feels like it's an interesting design because it doesn't look anything else like any of the starships in the show or the movies. But at the same time, it feels almost lazy.
Yep.
Like somebody just came up with a
Yep.
a black cylinder, and they're like, good enough. Let's just have this be the space probe.
Yeah, I wasn't very impressed with it. I also, do they go over why it needs to hear?
I guess it takes so long maybe for them to receive the signal from Earth or whatever. It's somebody said that like because the whales went extinct, they stopped getting the signal from Earth from the whales, and so they sent a probe to figure out why.
But why do they care?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
See, that's some of the stuff where I'm just like, they
didn't think it through exactly. And I don't understand why it was vaporizing the oceans. Was that also unintentional? Was that also from the beam and the sphere?
Yeah, I would imagine.
Okay. So once the sphere goes away. It focused, Spock at one point says like it's focusing its signal towards the oceans, which is where they obviously know the whales are. Why would you vaporize the water?
They're looking for it. Right. They're like, let's get rid of the water and we'll see if
I can't see through all this dang water. Let's get rid of it. Yeah, kind of weird. I like the in the beginning. I like when Spock and Kirk and his crew are on Vulcan. Even though that shot of the Klingon bird of prey is cool, but in HD you can really tell that it's a painting. You know, a matte painting. I mean, it still looks cool, but it's very 80s-ish because it just looks like paint on a canvas, basically, or on glass. But I like how all the crew is willing to head back to Earth and face the consequences for their actions and everything.
And I think, so you also have Spock. He's from, like you said, it's a trilogy. So the continuation story is he has basically been resurrected.
Yeah.
And he basically was given the knowledge of the Vulcans.
Right.
And they omitted the human because why would they're going to put this
human in there?
Yeah,
right.
it's bad.
Yeah.
So he's
why weaken him?
Straight up Vulcan in the brain,
right.
at this moment. But his mom mentions that eventually your human nature is going to come out and you're going to understand things like emotion and things like that.
It is really interesting that they killed off Spock and brought him back the way they did and didn't just immediately give him back his memories, because it's like it's interesting. They kind of play it almost like he kind of can remember, but it's not quite there. It's like just out of reach, kind of.
Right.
Because he's familiar with Kirk, but at the same time, he doesn't call him Jim. He always calls him Admiral, and Kirk is always being like, no, call me Jim. Don't you remember? And
right.
And so and at one point, he says, actually, I think he was talking about Kirk. Somebody says something and he was like, he's a man of deep feelings or something like that. So he is kind of relearning, I guess, who Kirk and McCoy are and everything.
I think it was probably just an interesting story, segment.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably fun for Leonard Nimoy to maybe kind of act it as well,
Yeah, and he directed the movie, so and he wrote
and has a story credit.
Yeah, so and being a comedy, I think they also were like, we can make jokes out of that too, because Spock's not going to be necessarily Spock, and we can, and they did good. Like I liked a lot of the, like I said, the comedy in it, and how they were kind of creative with how they made. So here's the thing. I really enjoyed watching the crew interact with a modern society, which we've seen in some of the past, episodes on the show, but it was more like noir, like 1940s.
Right.
I think this was the first time they had ever been
to modern day.
Yeah, unless they went to like the 60s in the show. I don't remember, but it was also kind of cool to watch it now, because we kind of got to understand and have a connection with the characters as to, when this movie first came out and the audience saw it, they were in present day and everything they saw was what was happening.
Right.
But we got to watch it looking back and be like, man, these guys are primitive. You know, like we understood. So we
Right.
kind of had like a middle, man of we get the primitive technology, but we also don't understand the technology of
Right.
the crew. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because we are even, we're obviously 30 years plus past 1986, so we have come a long way since then.
yeah, and we could have never imagined how far we'd come in 30 years. Like,
Right.
they show the yellow pages, and I'm just like,
Yeah. Right. Yeah, like if this movie was made now, they'd go back and they'd find, they would just, people would have cell phones and they'd look it up on the internet and stuff, and it was yeah. I like all the interaction with the people from the 80s. I especially like the hospital scene with McCoy because all of his little quips are just hilarious to me, where he is just so like blown away by the primitive medicine technology and everything, He's like, what is this, the Dark Ages?
Yeah, I love that too.
All that stuff cracks me up. I love it. But I do think this is one of the notes I wrote, and we're jumping kind of way ahead here, but I do kind of find it absolutely ridiculous. Unless they beamed in and I completely missed it. But I thought Chekhov and Uhura just sneak onto a Navy ship. And I was like, I don't know if that seems kind of ludicrous that they could just like walk past a guard and get on a Navy boat.
Speaking of that, like there's a scene in the hospital that we were just talking about where like they are dressed up as doctors and they're pushing Jillian around, and the police officer's like, no, strict orders.
Can't let you in.
Yeah, and then he's like, what do you want her to, die? And they're like, okay,
all right. Yeah, and then so like that I can kind of forgive because the cops are like, well, I don't want to, be, the doctor yelled at me and I don't want to be in the way of the doctor and saving a life. But then when they leave, she is clearly walking with them, and Chekhov's on the gurney, and they're like, how is she? And he's like, I can't remember what the cops ask exactly, but he's like, he'll be fine. He's like, you went in there with a woman. It's like, it's just very kind of silly, like, it's not quite slapstick comedy, but it was just very kind of, there's no way that would actually happen in real life type of thing.
Yeah, it was definitely.
If anything, the cops would have gone in with them. Like they would have gone into the room with them. I don't know. It was just the worst cops in the history of San Francisco, I guess. But I want to get your thoughts. I want to hear what you think about two things, really. Jillian, number one. But number two, when they first figure out where George and Gracie are and they go to the Institute and you see Spock in the water mind melding with one of the whales. Like, how did you feel about that scene?
I think that's like, I remembered it being hokey and not liking it because of that, but I think that was the moment where I realized, I probably did before, but just how silly of a comedy this was going to be, but to like accept it, because he's like swimming in there in his underwear.
Right.
Like he's taking off his robe and like the shot, he's just in his, and she's giving her, tour and has her back, and the people are just watching. And, I was fine with that.
I can't
as a joke.
Yeah. I do like that. Right before it happens, like Shatner starts looking around. Kirk's like, "Where'd Spock go?" And then he looks up and he's like, he sees him in the water, and he's, I forget what Jillian says. She says something about the whales and, probably talking about Whale Song. About them singing and stuff. And she's like, this old woman's like, well, maybe he's trying to sing to that man.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's exactly what it is.
Kind of silly too, but I like it. I like the whole idea that Spock is like, you know what? I'll just mind meld with this whale and talk to them.
Yeah, it worked. I accepted that.
And then Jill, what do you think about Catherine Hicks as Jillian? She's
I liked her.
Yeah.
I thought she was good. I was gonna say at the end when she ends up going with them, like they would have not taken her.
Right. She goes back to the future. Well, Back to the Future. She does go to the future with them, and I've always kind of I've always found that interesting. Because you're right. I don't think they would have taken her, even though she like pleads with them.
Well, she kind of makes it. She does make a case, which I was like, okay, that's fine. Like she says, who's gonna take care of these whales in the future? Like
nobody knows anything about whales. They've been extinct for. That's true.
Right. That was her case for going, and
she says she's got nobody here, no family or anything like that, I guess.
Speaking of, that's something I wrote down was her truck. The first time you see her in her truck and she's like passing them and she recognizes them as the guys that were like, I'm sure you noticed the I Love Wales sticker on the back.
Oh, really? I didn't actually. That's funny.
Like, there's just one sticker on the back that says I Love Wales. And then later it was driving away and I'm pretty sure it says on the license plate, but like without the vowels and stuff, like whale lover or something.
She really loves those whales.
She loves whales.
I think she does a great job with the movie. There's a couple of lines of dialogue where I remember thinking like she really pulled that off, and that would have been pretty kind of hard. Just being surprised by certain things and things like that. I do think one of the things that kind of bugs me. I love the scene where Kirk finally tells her the truth. They're at dinner, and she's like, "Let me guess, you're from outer space?" He's like, "No, I'm from Iowa, but I work in outer space." And she's like, "I knew outer space was going to come into play here eventually." But he tells her the truth, and she, of course, obviously doesn't buy it. And then I love when she has to pay for dinner. She's like, "Let me guess, they don't have money in the 23rd century." She's like, "We don't."
And I love, too, how that was like another reference to an earlier joke.
Right.
Or it wasn't a joke earlier, but he does mention, like, they
Needing
still use money
yeah.
here. So then when he says we don't, we know with him that they don't. He's telling the truth.
Yeah. So the thing that bugs me is she drops him off at the park where the cloaked Klingon bird of prey is. And she still doesn't believe him. And he's like, "I'm telling you the truth." And she's like, "Yeah, right, whatever." Why doesn't he just let her see him be beamed up? Like, "All right, well, you don't believe me? Here's the proof." And then say, "Scotty, beam me up."
Right. I thought about that too. And I was like, he's already told her, but maybe he's just letting her know so she knows, but he's not necessarily going to introduce her to the technology and all this stuff.
Technically, it's against the Prime Directive because they're not supposed to interfere with planets.
Right, but who's going to believe her, especially if she doesn't see him beamed up or anything?
Exactly.
She's just going to be some guy, crazy guy.
That's how the movie should have ended, though. Like, they should have actually, they dismissed all the charges. They demote him to captain, and they're like, "But you broke the Prime Direct. Not only did you tell this woman about, warp technology and all that stuff, you brought her to the future. So you're court-martialed." No.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but like he beams up like 2 seconds later. She's driving away. She kind of sees it.
Yeah.
Like in her peripheral, and she stops and looks, and she's like, "What?" She didn't, she's not really sure what's going on. But I was like, why wouldn't he just, he explained everything to her already. She clearly doesn't believe him. Why doesn't he just prove it to her? But maybe you're right. Maybe he was still trying to preserve some sort of.
Yeah, that's what I think. But here's the ultimate question of the entire movie. And I wrote it down pretty early. And that is, if they can go back in time, why didn't they go get humpback whales? I guess it didn't affect Earth. Because if humpback whales going extinct had a huge impact on Earth, it would have been a big moment in their history.
Right.
And then they would have been like, well, let's just go. We can time travel now. Let's just go get some humpback whales and we'll rebreed them and we don't have to worry about poachers now.
Yeah, I don't think it was probably sad, but I don't think it affected Earth until this probe showed up and started destroying their technology and vaporizing the oceans.
Right.
And then they were like, "Oh crap, we shouldn't have killed those whales."
I like how, like Spock, technically, he's the one that gives us all the information, or to Kirk, when he brings up, "That's the sound of whales." And Kirk's like,
whale.
Kirk's like, "Whales?"
I will say, I noticed there's the kind of the typical William Shatner impression people do where they're like, "Whales." They do like the very exaggerated kind of shoulder stuff and the arm movements and all that stuff. He does that a couple times in this movie. Like most of the time I'm like, that's very exaggerated. I can kind of see. But like there was one moment especially where he's talking to Spock and Spock is like, "I'll make my best guess." And he's like, "Your best guess?" And he goes, "That's extraordinary." Just so, it was so like a Shatner impression almost. It cracked me up. But there's another moment where you just said, that was like exactly a Shatnerism, I guess you could say.
One of my the part I laughed out loud the most at was when they were in the truck, and it was before he tells her that they're from the future and stuff, and they were making plans for dinner, and she's like, "You guys like Italian?" And they both, Spock, yes. And Spock is so determined to say no. He's like, no. And then Kirk finally goes, yes, I love Italian. and then Spock kind of looks back at him and he goes, yes. That's
Which
the
is
part.
Interesting because Spock earlier said he couldn't lie. So does he not like Italian, or does he like Italian?
Yeah, or maybe, yeah. It's clearly a violation. It's his emotion coming out.
That's right. It's the human side that his mom was right was coming out there at in that moment.
But I saw his first emotion when he first gets on the ship, because Spock, like when he first sees Kirk again, and like he has that conversation, and Kirk's like, "You don't remember me, do you?" Like, but Spock goes, I apologize for my attire.
Right.
So he was actually saying he was sorry for something, and I don't know if he was just doing it because he knew that humans, out of respect.
Right.
But why does he care to apologize?
Yeah.
And that was like within the first 15 minutes of the movie. So he's already, in my mind, starting to feel the emotion.
Sure. Probably. Yeah, for sure. One of my favorite little jokes in the movie too is when Scotty is, he's at the plant trying to pick up, like, I forget what it is he's actually trying to purchase, even though they don't have money, but like the walls to keep the whales in and make sure the water and everything is fine. And he gives the guy the code or whatever you want to call it, the algorithm for transparent aluminum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is it McCoy? Is he with McCoy? Yeah, he goes,
I believe it's McCoy and Scotty, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps the professor can use your computer. And so Scotty sits down and he goes, hello? He's like, computer. And then McCoy, and I don't know how McCoy knows this, but McCoy
hands him the mouse,
and he's like, thank you. And he holds it up to his mouth. Hello, computer. Yeah,
yes.
that was great. I like that a lot.
I did too. And he was so happy, he's like, oh, of course. He's like, now it'll work. Hello, computer. But also he knows how to use the keyboard like a master.
Right. With just two fingers. Like he only types with two fingers.
And I don't know what operating system that was, but he knows his way around it too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Doesn't know how to use a mouse, but that old 1986 operating system he's fine with.
Yeah. Also, Spock knows things like, I think it was, I don't remember who said it. It was Bones, says a quote from Hamlet.
Yeah.
And Spock like goes,
Act 1, Scene 4. Yeah.
But he doesn't know the term fill your shoes. Like, I don't want to, I wouldn't want to fill your shoes. Like, and he goes, fill my shoes? He also like asks another thing. So he knows like direct acts of Hamlet, but he doesn't know like common
English. He doesn't know
English
like idioms, I guess. Yeah. Because she asks him, are you sure you won't change your mind? And he's like, what's wrong with the one I have? Or something like that. So yeah, it's like phrases, I guess he's unfamiliar with, but literature and whatever.
Maybe fill your shoes didn't make it to the 23rd century. I don't know.
Maybe not.
Speaking of the 23rd century, the crystals that they're using, were those for the time travel?
I think, they talked about dilithium crystals, so I think that's used for the warp drive and stuff, right?
Okay, right. So he mentions they can't recharge them in the 23rd century because nuclear power had been, shut down.
Eradicated or whatever. Yeah.
But Spock knows that back in the 20th century, when they had them, they could charge them then. And I'm like,
nuclear-powered naval vessels.
If Spock knows that this way of doing, that you can recharge crystals, why wouldn't they have rebuilt reactors to
why wouldn't
charge these crystals?
Right.
So, yeah.
They got rid of nuclear power, and so because they got rid of nuclear power, they can no longer do this very important thing that is maybe vital for starships.
Yeah.
And you'd think even
now,
if
but
they
here's
got
the thing:
rid of
Scotty
nuclear...
doesn't even know. He mentions
Right.
he's like he was like, we can't even do that in the 23rd century.
Scotty should have been like, why have you kept this to yourself
That's what
this
I'm
whole time,
saying.
Spock?
We've been mining crystals. That's why we're going out there. It's half the reason we have to go get fuel that we could be doing here.
You jerk. That's a great point. I mean, even if they had, like you said, even if they had stopped using nuclear power, you'd think that somebody would have figured out an alternate way to regrow the crystals the way that the nuclear power method did. I'm guessing that maybe here's the thing, even though, again, Spock knows this, why keep it to himself? And surely he's not the first one to think of it, but they probably stopped using nuclear power before maybe dilithium was discovered, at least by humans.
Right.
But I don't know.
But I said, the Vulcans...
He knew it because he needed to know it, for the storyline.
Right.
But, yeah.
Well, that's bad story writing, Leonard.
It is. It's convenient.
I'm kidding.
It's one of those... I mean, that's why I think that's part of the reason why they show him in the beginning taking those tests, because it shows, like, how much he's learning.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
The broad education and everything. So that way we buy it when he's like, well, in the late 20th century, they use blah, 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 nuclear-powered naval vessels.
Right.
So that way you kind of...
So it's the Vulcans that are actually the enemy in this, because they have been keeping this information to themselves the whole time.
They have some ulterior motives about, dilithium. They've got, like, a huge stake in dilithium crystal mining operations or something.
There you go.
If we give them this information, then we won't have to mine anymore and we'll lose money.
The Vulcans saying that is hilarious. I wrote down there's a moment in the movie where Kirk... It's Uhura, right?
Uhura?
Yeah.
What about her?
He calls her Uhura. Like,
really?
Yes. Through, like, he's, like, talking to her through the speaker system, and he goes, Uhura. And I was like, Uhura?
Weird.
And I was like, have I been hearing it wrong this whole time? But they say it later, and it's Uhura. So...
Weird.
He forgot how to pronounce her name, I guess.
Weird. That's strange. It's like the whole Han Solo thing. It's like they should have, like, why didn't they, decide on the right way to say it?
Who calls him Han?
I'm pretty sure Lando does in Empire, doesn't he?
I don't remember.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure somebody in one of the movies calls him Han Solo rather than Han Solo.
Gotcha. Well, you also have you have the British accents. That could be it. Maybe it was one of the because you hear them refer to it as the Millennium Falcon and the Millennium Falcon.
Right.
Which
and
the British accents is like the Empire. So maybe one of them called him Han Solo.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Now I'm just gonna have to rewatch all three movies now just to see if I'm.
It could have been
right
Lando, and maybe they did that intentionally to kind of be like, well, some people call him Han, some people call him Han, like, fans. So
we'll have a character do it.
Yeah, and that way they can argue. It can go either way.
Yeah. I didn't write this down, but I thought of it earlier when we were talking about kind of hokey stuff. One of the things I actually kind of don't like about the movie is the costumes. Uhura and I think Scotty wear their Wrath of Khan uniforms throughout most of the movie. But like Chekhov, Sulu, and Kirk, and Spock wears that robe throughout most of the movie. They all wear like their regular clothes, but they're 23rd century regular clothes. But it's really what the 80s kind of thought 23rd century clothes would look like. And I just think their clothes look outdated and kind of silly. Like I don't like any of their outfits really in this movie.
Yeah, I agreed. I picked up on that too. I was thinking they look different, but they also look, I don't know, maybe in the 23rd century, they just don't have any taste in
maybe in fashion. maybe that's right. I wish they had just all worn their Starfleet uniforms, but I realized that would have been harder for them to kind of blend in with the modern day people and everything. But Uhura wears hers on the streets and everything. So
Right.
I don't know. The
I thought it
nuclear
was-
vessels.
I thought it was. That part was amazing. Because what was going on with Russia when this movie was made? Was it
we were in the Cold War and everything, I think.
Yeah.
So.
What did the Cold War go? Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure Rocky 4 was around the same time. The late 80s, right? Mid to late 80s.
Yeah. So anyway, you've got Chekhov, like literally
Right.
first speaking to a police officer, like, "Where's the nuke?" I can't do it. but-
I'm looking for the nuclear vessels. And he's just like, you kidding me, pal?
And he just starts going and asking everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that part. I also like when Kirk sells the glasses and gets $100, and he's like,
Is that
"Is
a
that a
lot?
lot?" And then it cuts. I love the cut it goes to is really what gets me. Is it cuts to him with them all in a circle around him, and he's handing them each their money so they can have it as they disperse.
Right.
That was pretty funny. I thought that was funny.
Yeah. I like the two little time travel gimmicks they did. Like Spock stops him right before he sells the glasses, and he's like, "Weren't those a gift from Dr. McCoy?" And he goes, "That's the best part. They still will, they will be still, And then when Scotty, McCoy pulls Scotty aside and he's like, aren't we altering the future by giving this guy the transparent aluminum, whatever? And he's like, how do we know he didn't invent it?
Yeah. I like how that was like we're good to go.
Right. Yeah. No problems. The score for this movie is decent. I think it's also very kind of light. It has a very different kind of feeling than some of the other Star Trek movies. It doesn't have. That's the other thing I was going to say about this movie, actually, is there's no real bad guy in this movie. Like in Wrath of Khan, you've got Khan. In Search for Spock, you got Christopher Lloyd's Klingon character, whose name I can't remember. And but in this one, it's just a probe that is potentially going to destroy the Earth, and so they got to go get the whales. And so then the whole conflict in the for most of the movie is just them trying to get these whales. It's a race against the clock. That's what most of this movie is. It's a race against the clock. The whales are going to be shipped off at this time. We got to get the whales before then. Then the whales end up actually getting shipped off earlier than that. I also like how there's immediately a whale hunting ship like right there about to kill Georgie
right
and
after
Gracie.
they've been released. Like they're done for.
Yeah. And so then having to get back, which obviously they time traveled, so that's not so much a race against the clock. They can spend as much time as they really wanted in 1986 as long as they go back right at that moment. But Spock is having to do all those calculations from memory. But he does a great job. Gets him right back to where, like, few seconds before they left, really, because I think we see, like, a line of dialogue or two that we had seen before right before they left. But yeah, anyway, so I think we can get into our ratings. I'd love to hear what your rating is now. Actually, I'd love to hear what your original rating would have been.
I have
versus
no idea. Now. Yeah, it's gone up. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Probably maybe a 2.5 before.
Right.
And I still think the whale thing is like, that's what I was going to say, was that I'm okay with the time, like the race against the clock and there not being an antagonist and it being the ship. That's fine. But the idea of we don't know why it's so important for this ship to get a response from these whales.
Maybe the aliens were just like just a really big fan of humpback whales. And when the signal stopped, they were like, "Oh, these guys better not have made these whales extinct," And it was like they were coming to they were going to destroy Earth if we had killed off the whales.
It's like their sleep music. Basically, they listen to the songs of the whales.
I can't
now
sleep
they can't
unless
sleep.
I hear from the whales. I like that better, actually. Come on, it's killing me.
So I'm going to, because I appreciated a little bit more of the comedy, but the story's hokey. I'll give it 3 out of 5. Humpback whales.
That's pretty good. Nice. I like it a little bit more than that. I really think it's a fun movie. It does have a different tone than the first three movies. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think especially after all of TOS and then the first three movies being so serious that it can have a little bit lighter tone. I mean, it doesn't go into parody or farce, I don't think. So it's they stay true to their characters for the most part. They just have a little bit of fun with it, and so I can appreciate that. And I don't mind either the race against the clock or not having an antagonist, really. I think it actually really works pretty well.
Yeah, it's good to kind of switch it up sometimes.
Yeah. I just think some of the movie, it has some stuff that's dated. Obviously, the 1986 scenes are dated because it was 1986. But like I said, too, the clothing and some of the special effects and stuff are a little bit dated in here. But I can kind of forgive a lot of that. But so for me, I give it 4 out of 5. Kirk reading glasses. I don't know. I had to think of something there.
That was great. No, that's great. I love it.
So, yeah. Well, we'd love to know what you think about Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. You can always reach us at cinemaheroes.com. You can tweet at us or comment on our Instagram post. Both handles are Cinema Heroes. You can leave a comment on our Facebook page, facebook.com/SM and SM Podcast. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave us a comment down below and let us know your favorite moment in this movie or what Star Trek movies you prefer. And if this is the first time on your channel, you can give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to hear from you. Any way you want to reach out to us. I think that about wraps it up for this episode, though. I'm Justin Speck.
I'm John Pelzel.
As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. See, John, that wasn't hard. You just got to memorize that speech.